Hi, I'm Max Mason and I'm a mayoral contender for the 2016 local government elections. 1 year ago, I completed the most grueling adventure of my life. I hiked the Appalachian Trail in the United States. It took me 6 months and I walked 3,500 kilometers. So over the next 10 minutes or so, I'm going to tell you the story of my adventure, and I hope that you will use that information to tell other people about it and to give some sort of insight, I guess, into my character as a potential mayor. And also, I have given now 21 presentations, either 20 or 40 minutes, and I normally do it for charitable purpose. So we raise some money for causes such as homelessness. So, the Appalachian Trail was started in the 1930s as a form of work creation during the Great Depression. And over time, it went, sorry, I'll just move that back. Over a period of time, it has become the longest trail in the world that is where you can walk the whole distance. There are other trails that are longer, but it is the longest continuous footpath. So, what got me into thinking about the trails that I'd always wanted to spend a whole year in the bush or the natural environment and see this changing of the seasons. So that's what I did. I went through 3 seasons, so spring, summer, and then autumn in the United States. And one of the most wonderful natural experience I could possibly ever hope to have. So about 2,500 people started, and they start over a period of about 6 or 8 weeks. And people go off on ones and twos or drips and drabs, some groups, but mostly as individuals. And I started on the 20th of March, 2015. So it goes through 14 states, and you carry a pack all the way with you. Obviously, and most of the way you actually sleep in a tent, and I'll tell you a little bit about my story of that. So those are all of the goods that I had with me. That was my first day, and I got on top of the mountain, Springer Mountain in Georgia, and I knew that ahead of me I had 14 states to get through and 3,500 kilometers. And the travel, you walk along the top of the ridge line of the Appalachian Mountains. So it is continuously rocky nearly all the way. So this is me. Now I'm going to, the next slide is me 177 days later at their last day, which is in fact the 13th of September 2015, so exactly 1 year ago. So that's me, somewhat of a different beard, and certainly I didn't have the wild enthusiasm that you saw in the first slide. So anyway, let's go back to the beginning. So people always ask, what is how do you sleep? And most people actually sleep in every 7 to 10 miles, there is a shelter. So it's a 3-sided shelter, and everybody packs in there with their little sort of roll-up mattresses and their sleeping bags, and they sleep. There's no lights, no anything. There's only a long drop toilet or compostable toilet, and the next thing they have is a bear bag, which I'll get to in a second. Now, this was my tent. I preferred not to sleep in the shelters. After a while, I found that the noise and that sort of thing, I preferred having my own little tent, a little 2-person tent that I slept in, and I absolutely loved it. So I slept in that 6 days a week for 6 months. So these are the bear bags that I was talking about. There are black bears continually along the path, so you have to watch out for them when you sleep at night and to be safe. I wasn't too sure about that until I saw this that's gouge out of a tree one day, and I said to a friend of mine I was hiking, "What did that?" And he said it was a bear looking for grubs. So I thought, imagine what he was doing, looking for a Snickers bar in my tent. So I was safe after that. I put my food bag over the bear cables to keep me safe at night. So this was my first friend I met after a couple of days on the trail. His name is Mountain Dew, as he was called. Now everybody on the trail, in fact, has a trail name. You can either take it yourself, give one yourself, or you can give somebody else gives it to you. And he was called Mountain Dew because he loved getting up early in the morning, with the dew. My name that I gave myself was Happy. The reason I gave that is because I knew that I had to psych myself into through some very, very difficult times. I knew that what I was letting myself in for, and so the word happy is that I've always believed that happiness is a choice. And so if I called myself happy and other people called me happy, it would be a constant reminder that I was there to be happy. And it worked very, very well. So the actual trail itself is, as I said, it's a continuous footpath. And the most important thing is that you don't need a map. All you need to do is follow the blazes, as they're called. Every couple of 100 meters there's a blaze, and you just follow the footpath and along you go. So this is a rare flat bit. The Appalachian Trail is more like that image there, and we had a very, very wet spring. But as the summer went on, it dried out quite a bit, and we had really pretty good weather. Only rained a couple of times a week. It's also a very rocky and rooty trail because a lot of people travel on it. So as I said earlier, that about 2,500 people start the trail, and this was through hikers, and only about 25% make it to the end 6 months later, or some people do in 4 months, but about 25% of it make it. But there are, in fact, a couple of million people who use the trail just for short hikes, like day hikes or over the weekends during the summer, etc. So the rest of it, the through hikers have a certain sort of reputation, and people look at them with a certain amount of awe. But we always said to the people who would talk to us, "Oh, you're a through hiker." And we say, "No, not a through hiker until we've completed it." So this is another just image of the trail. You might think it's just a pile of rocks, but as you can see, there's a trail. There's a blaze there, which means that you have to walk up straight up there. And a lot of the trail is in fact like that. It's very, very, very tough terrain. But for all the hard times, you come across the most sublime moments, natural moments that that you can imagine, looking out over the world for eternity. So what happens is that typically you would hike for 3 or 4 days until you come to a road that goes over the mountains, and those normally lead to little trail towns. So you hitchhike into town, buy a couple of days' food, hitchhike back onto the trail, and set off again. So you wouldn't sleep the night in town. And you go for another couple of days. So typically it was about every 6 days on average that we'd get to sort of a bigger town if you want, and hitchhike down into that. Then you have to do your laundry because you haven't showered or washed and you're showering for 6 days, so you're in a pretty state. And then you have a really good meal with vegetables and fruit, etc. Have a couple of beers with your friends, and then basically the next day you hitchhike back onto the road, and off you go. There's some tremendously interesting people. Now, what I found was the two different cultures on the trail. Really, there was the two major groups. The average ages are 22. And that's Wallace, and he's 22, and then myself, I was 55, sorry, which gives me I was the older age group. So those are the two major age groups. So it's really interesting how they work. That's a typical scene at a shelter. At the end of the day, having a bit of a yarn, and there's quite often a fire going, and just a bit of a chat about the day's events. I met some tremendously inspirational people. So these are just some of my friends. There's Walnuts. I've hiked with him about the last 1,000 kilometers. That there is Old Eagle Scout. He was also another good friend. But the guy I want to really point to is the one in the middle. And his name was Icefire. And Icefire was in fact legally blind. He could only see a very small sort of window of sight that he had. And he used to fall every single day, but he made it. So absolutely inspirational. These two young men here, they picked up trash all the way and dropped it off at towns. Absolutely great inspiration for environmentalists. These people here were all piled in a truck going into town from some trailhead. And that lady there, her name was Chocolate. Now, Chocolate had 10 children. Her husband's name was Simple Man. And Chocolate and Simple Man, they hiked all the way with 5 of those kids. The other 5, the older 5, were in fact at university. And those are 4 of the 5 that were on the trail. Absolutely wonderful young people. And it just shows that they can actually hike just as well as adults can. For me, one of the great parts, as I said, of this natural experience was being part of the seasons. And there's nothing more beautiful than seeing the wildflowers. I just absolutely found that absolutely inspirational. Every day I would just be full of the buzz, especially in the morning, of the natural environment changing. Every day you see the little changes. And there was a lot of wildlife as well on the trail. So there's a black rat snake, lots of them. Bears. On one occasion I was walking along and I saw two little cubs in the distance. I thought it was great, and I brought up my camera, and I started walking towards them, videoing it for quite a while. And I thought, oh my goodness, I can't see the mother. and thought, oh, and at that moment, just right next to me, I heard the sound and I looked around and there was the mother bear. And I thought, oh my goodness, she's going to have a go at me. But she didn't. She ran off and intersected between the trail and me and her cubs and went off. And I, of course, backed off. So I got a bit of a fright there. But I saw 7 bears altogether, which was great. Lots of beavers, beaver ponds, was just lovely to see them. That's the most dangerous animal on trail, not because it's physically dangerous, but because it carries deer ticks, and you can get Lyme disease from that. So I drenched my legs every day with DEET to prevent myself getting Lyme disease, which can be very, very serious. Thousands upon thousands of chipmunks all day long going cheep, 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 cheep. In one place, the Grayson Highlands, you see a lot of feral ponies, and they live there through the winter, terrible winters, and it's extraordinary how they survive. Well, food is really important. Now, most people eat about 2,500 calories a day. We were eating more than double that to keep us going. Now, I was walking about on average 23 kilometers a day. My pack was about 16 kgs, and so use it, and you up and down hills all the time. So a lot of energy being expended. And I was very lucky because my wife was living in the States at the time, doing some research, and she used to send me these food parcels to post offices or shelters in the towns ahead of me. Now, as I say, you go through 14 different states, so every time you pass a state line, it's a great feeling that you've ticked off another state, and it's really important for you to sign off on big things as you go. The halfway along is a town called Harper's Ferry, and once you got there, it's a really good psychological boost. And I was really boosted for a second reason, as my son Mungo came to visit me on the trail for a couple of days, and he in fact hiked with me and saw the culture and my friends and everything else on the trail. Another great waypoint is the place where everybody stops and tries to eat a half-gallon ice cream challenge. So it took me 1 hour 7 minutes to eat a 2-liter ice cream tub. How long would it take you? Keeping in touch is really important, so mobile phones. So most of the time you can't get coverage, but when you do, you see somebody sitting there and you see all the people cluster along the trail, just where you can get a little sort of hotspot of coverage. Otherwise you can't get hold of people until you go down into the towns and you get Wi-Fi in the hostels and the motels that you stay in. For me, my daily routine is that in the morning I'd hike quite fast, but then I would sort of tire as the day will go on, and then I would put on my headphones and I would listen to all kinds of books on philosophy or poetry or natural world or science, and I absolutely loved that. I was listening to books all the way along, and in fact I ended up right in the last 2 states, I ended up listening to Game of Thrones. In fact, the fiction was the storylines that took me, and it took me through some very, very tough times. So hitchhiking is good. There's Walnut and I having a hitchhiking into town with a couple of other blokes, and that was fun. But it's tough when you 55, you're full of dirt and you smell, and sometimes people don't pick you up, and it's raining, and it sorts you out, makes you a little bit humble. So the last second last state is New Hampshire. That's the rockiest, and then the last 2 states, they say you've done 80% of the miles, but 50% of the effort, and that is absolutely true because it is horrendously difficult, and you in fact halve your daily hours from 2 miles per hour to 1 mile an hour for the last 2 states. In Maine, there are also a lot of bogs, and you have these bog logs. And one lady that fell off the logs, my friends found her a little bit later. She'd fallen twisted into the bog like this, and she couldn't get out. And mosquitoes just came and they hammered her for a couple of hours before my friends came along and hauled her out. So lots of things like that. You're continually getting bitten and scraped, and all kinds of things happened. This is something very sad we came across as a woman 2 years previously had gone missing. And in fact, we read a newspaper report recently that in fact they found her remains, and nobody ever knows. She just died just off the trail. Now, one of the things that's really quite important is water in the trail, and you come across a lot of water, obviously, and you drink. And I always filtered my water. You cross a tremendous amount of streams, 4, 5, 6 streams a day. Sometimes quite big ones. We have to have a rope to go across. And in this one, in fact. You might not actually be on the trail, but you are, because there's a blaze there, you're technically on the trail because you have to go across by canoe. I lost 10 kgs and my feet were tremendously painful, my whole legs and particularly my feet. It was like after the trail for 4 months, I felt like walking on pebbles. It was so painful. So my stats, it was 3,500 Ks, 23 Ks a day on average. My record in 5 days was 168 kilometers. Yeah, it took 177 days. So this was going over the state line into Maine, the last one. And on my last day, Mount Katahdin, which is one of the most difficult, 5,500 feet, and it just goes up and up and up until we got to the end. And that was the most extraordinary experience of my life. And I can say with great truthfulness that I never realized that I could do something like this. I was never any sort of sportsman at school, at school or anything like that. And the real realization for me is that anybody is capable of something if you get your head right and you get the determination and you get the support from your family and your friends, and you can do anything. So that's the end of my presentation. But I would like to say, if anybody here in Tauranga wants to me to come out and give an extended version of this talk, I can do 20-minute or 40-minute presentations. We do, as I say, a pass around the hat for charity. I'll be delighted to come and speak to you. So thank you, and remember to vote Max Mason for mayor. Thank you.